My daughter-in-law's mother handed me an envelope on my own front porch and said, "Open this before Rebecca gets here." That was 3 days after my own son told me he didn't have $20 for my blood pressure medicine. The same week he bought his mother-in-law a diamond tennis bracelet for her 60th birthday. I stood there holding that envelope in the rain, and I felt something in my chest crack open that had been sealed shut for 30 years. I'm 64 years old. For 31 years I drove a delivery truck for a regional freight company out of Scranton, Pennsylvania, hauling everything from auto parts to office furniture up and down the interstate in all kinds of weather. It wasn't a job that made me rich. It was a job that made my hands ache by 50 and my knees give out by 60. But it kept a roof over my son's head and food on his plate, and back then that felt like enough. My wife Diane died when my son Michael was 11. Cancer, fast and cruel, the kind that takes a woman from diagnosis to gone in under a year. I remember sitting in a hospital hallway holding my son's hand while doctors talked to me in words I didn't understand. And I remember thinking, I have no idea how to do this alone. But you don't get a choice in those moments. You just do it. You learn to braid a girl's hair for her school picture day, except I didn't have a daughter. I had a boy who needed someone to teach him how to shave and how to throw a football and how to be a man in a world that had just taken his mother from him. I never remarried. People used to ask me why, especially in those early years when I was young enough that it would have made sense. The truth is I didn't have room in my life for anyone else. Every ounce of energy I had went into that boy. I worked overtime whenever it was offered so he could play travel baseball with the other kids whose fathers had 2 incomes in the house. I skipped my own doctor's appointments so I could afford his cleats, his bat, his glove. I told myself none of that mattered because he was worth it. He was the only thing I had left of Diane, and every time he smiled, I saw her. Michael was a good kid growing up, polite, hardworking in his own way. He got decent grades, not spectacular, but decent. He got into a state school on a partial scholarship, and I covered the rest by taking out a loan against my truck and picking up every overtime shift the company would give me. I remember driving him up to campus in August, his whole life packed into the bed of my truck in cardboard boxes, and I remember standing in that dorm parking lot after I said goodbye, sitting in my truck for 20 minutes before I could make myself drive home, because the house was going to be so quiet without him. He met Rebecca his junior year. She was smart, ambitious, studying business, the kind of girl who had a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan and probably a plan for what she'd have accomplished by the time she was buried. I liked her fine when I met her. She was polite to me in the way people are polite to something they've decided doesn't really concern them. Her family had money, real money, the kind that comes from 3 generations of owning things instead of building them with your hands. Her father had sold an insurance brokerage for what I heard was a very significant sum, and her mother, a woman named Patricia, ran some kind of boutique interior design business that seemed to mostly involve traveling to Palm Beach and posting about it. The first time I went to their house for Thanksgiving, after Michael and Rebecca got engaged, I parked my old truck at the end of a long circular driveway because I didn't want to block anyone in, and I walked up past a fountain, an actual fountain, to a front door that looked like it belonged on a church. Patricia answered wearing pearls on a Thursday afternoon. She looked at my flannel shirt, the same flannel shirt I'd worn to 100 Thanksgivings before, and she smiled that smile people give you when they're deciding you're not a threat to anything they care about. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself Michael loved me, and that was what counted, and that these people, whatever they thought of a retired truck driver in a flannel shirt, weren't the ones who'd sat up all night with him when he had the flu, or taught him to change a tire on the shoulder of I-80 in a snowstorm, or worked a double shift on Christmas Eve so there'd be presents under the tree. The wedding was beautiful and expensive, paid for almost entirely by Rebecca's parents, which I understood because I couldn't have covered even the flowers on my pension. I gave a short toast. I told a story about Michael as a boy, about how he used to leave his mother notes before she died, little drawings, because he was scared he'd forget her voice. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, except maybe Patricia's, who checked her phone twice during it. Things were fine for a few years after that. Michael called me most Sundays. He and Rebecca had a daughter, my granddaughter Chloe, and for a while I saw them fairly often, and holding that baby was the closest thing to peace I'd felt since Diane passed. But slowly, the way water wears down stone, things shifted. The Sunday calls got shorter, then less frequent. Michael took a job at Robert's old insurance company that was Rebecca's father's name. Robert some kind of client relations position that paid well and that Michael clearly owed to his father-in-law's connections rather than his own resume. He started dressing different, started talking different, using words like portfolio and leverage that I'd only ever heard on the news. He started calling Robert Dad at family gatherings right in front of me, and the first time I heard it I had to excuse myself to the bathroom because I didn't trust my face not to show what that did to me. I never said anything. What was I going to say? It's that I was jealous a man could give my son things I never could. That felt petty even inside my own head, so I swallowed it the way I'd swallowed a lot of things over the years, and I kept showing up to birthdays and holidays where I sat a little further from the center of the table each time. About 14 months ago, my doctor found out my blood pressure had climbed to a dangerous level, stage 2 hypertension, the kind that puts you at real risk for a stroke if it isn't controlled. He put me on a medication, a generic, nothing exotic, that I needed to take every single day without fail. My pension from 31 years of driving covers my rent and my utilities and groceries if I'm careful. But there isn't a lot of slack in it, and Medicare covered most of the medication's cost. But not all. My share came out to about $20 a month for the prescription. $20. I want you to sit with that number, because I sat with it plenty, and I still can't quite believe how much it ended up costing me. I'd been managing fine, budgeting the way I'd budgeted my whole life, cutting back on the small things so the necessary things always got covered. Then my car needed a new alternator, an emergency I hadn't planned for, and it ate through the little cushion I had. When my prescription came due that month, I had $11 in my checking account and 4 days until my pension check landed. I want to be honest with you. I hesitated for 2 full days before I called my son. I had never asked Michael for money in his entire adult life. Not once. It wasn't pride exactly, or maybe it was exactly pride, but it felt like calling him would be admitting something I didn't want to admit, that the man who used to be able to do anything for that boy now couldn't scrape together $20 for a pill that kept his heart from giving out on him. But I thought about my blood pressure, about the stroke risk, about Chloe, about wanting to be around long enough to walk her down some aisle someday, and pride lost. I called him on a Tuesday evening. He picked up on the 4th ring, and I could hear a television in the background, some sports commentary, and the sound of ice in a glass. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" "Hey, son. How's everybody? How's Chloe doing with the reading thing you mentioned?" She's good. She's good. Listen, I don't have a ton of time. We're actually about to head out. Patricia's got a thing tonight. What's going on?" I remember the way my chest tightened at that, at how fast he was already trying to get off the phone with me. I made myself say it anyway. "I hate to even bring this up, but I'm in a bit of a bind this week. The car needed a repair and it wiped out my cushion, and my blood pressure prescription is due, and I'm about $20 short until my pension check comes Friday. Any chance you could spot me until then? Then, I'll pay you right back." There was a silence on the line that stretched long enough I checked to see if the call had dropped. "Dad." He said it slow, the way you talk to someone you're bracing to disappoint. "Things are just really tight for us right now. Chloe's in this new enrichment program, and we just committed to some renovations on the kitchen, and Rebecca and I had a whole conversation about tightening the budget for the next few months. I just don't have anything liquid right now. It's $20, Michael. It's not a loan for a car. It's my blood pressure medicine. I know, and I feel bad, but it's not really about the amount. It's about the principle, you know. Rebecca and I are trying to be disciplined about not just handing money out whenever family asks, because it can turn into a pattern. You understand, right? A pattern. I had asked him for money exactly 0 times before that phone call in 30 years, and he called it a pattern. "Sure," I said, "because what else do you say? I understand. I'll figure something out. Thanks for being cool about it, Dad. I'll call you this weekend, okay? Love you." He hung up before I could answer. I stood in my kitchen holding a phone that still had a crack across the screen from when I dropped it moving furniture 2 years back, and I looked at the pill bottle on my counter with 2 tablets rattling around in the bottom of it, and something in me went very quiet and very cold. That night, I did something my doctor had explicitly warned me never to do. I took a butter knife and I cut what pills I had left in half, figuring I'd stretch 2 days into 4, take a reduced dose, and hope it held my numbers down until Friday. I know now how dangerous that was. At the time it felt like the only math that made any sense. 3 days later, on a Friday evening, I was sitting on my back steps with a cup of instant coffee, and I made the mistake of opening Facebook on my phone, something I mostly use to see pictures of Chloe. And there it was, right at the top of my feed. And a photo of Patricia, Rebecca's mother, holding up her wrist in front of a birthday cake, a bracelet on it that caught the light in a way that made my stomach drop even before I read the caption. Diamonds, a whole line of them, set in white gold. The caption, written by Rebecca, said, "Surprised mom with the bracelet she's been eyeing for her 60th. Michael found the exact one. So, blessed to have a husband this generous. Love you, Mom." I sat there on my back steps, and I did the arithmetic in my head, the same arithmetic I'd done for 31 years on every purchase that mattered, and I knew, even without a price tag, that a bracelet like that wasn't $100. It wasn't $500. Something like that, from the look of the stones, was in the thousands. Easily $4,000 or $5,000. Maybe more. My son had found $4,000 or $5,000 for his mother-in-law's bracelet 3 days after telling me he didn't have $20 for my heart medicine. I didn't cry. I want to tell you I cried, because that's what you'd expect, but I didn't. I just felt something very old and very familiar settle over me, a feeling I remembered from childhood, from watching my own father get passed over for a promotion he'd earned twice. The feeling of understanding exactly where you rank in a world that has already made up its mind about you. I put the phone face down on the step beside me and I watched the sun go down, and I didn't say a word to anybody. I made it to Friday on half doses and stubbornness. When my pension check hit, I drove straight to the pharmacy and paid for a full month, and the pharmacist, a young woman named Angela who'd filled my prescriptions for 2 years and knew me by name, asked if everything was all right, because apparently I looked it. I told her I was fine. I've told a lot of people I was fine over the years when I very much was not. I didn't call Michael that weekend to yell at him. I didn't post anything angry online. I did what I've always done, which is nothing, which I'm starting to understand was its own kind of mistake. 30 years of nothing stacked one on top of the other until the weight of it was unbearable and nobody but me even knew it was there. Then came the Thursday, about 2 weeks later. It had been raining since early morning, the kind of steady gray rain that soaks through everything. I was in my recliner watching the news with the sound low, half asleep, when I heard a knock at my front door. I don't get many visitors these days. My brother lives in Ohio and calls twice a year. Most of my old coworkers from the freight company have passed on or moved south for their arthritis. I figured it might be a neighbor about the fence or somebody selling something. I opened the door, and there stood Patricia, Rebecca's mother, the woman who answered her own front door in pearls, standing on my cracked concrete porch, soaked through, no umbrella, her expensive blouse plastered to her shoulders, holding a manila envelope pressed against her chest like she was trying to keep it dry with her own body. I hadn't spoken more than 10 words to this woman directly in probably 2 years. I stood there with the door half open, genuinely stunned, trying to figure out what could possibly have brought her to my street, let alone my porch. "Frank," she said, and her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, none of the polished distance I was used to. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you about something, and I need to do it before Rebecca gets here." I stepped aside and let her in. My living room isn't much: a recliner, a couch I bought secondhand a decade ago, a TV that's older than my granddaughter, but it's clean, and I was suddenly conscious of that in a way I hadn't been in years, watching her eyes move around the room. She didn't look at it with pity, though. She looked at it like she was seeing it, really seeing it, for the first time. She sat on the edge of my couch, and I sat in my recliner across from her, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then she set the envelope on the coffee table between us and folded her hands on top of it like she was praying. "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it except plainly," she said. 2 weeks ago, at my birthday dinner, Michael made a joke. He'd had a few drinks, and Robert asked him how retirement planning was coming, some small talk, and Michael laughed and said, "Better than my old man's, that's for sure." He tried to hit me up for gas money a couple weeks back. Had to shut that down before it became a habit. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. "Everyone laughed," she said. "I laughed too, God forgive me. I didn't think anything of it at the time," said, "but it stuck with me, and 3 days ago I asked Rebecca about it, just casually, and she told me the real story. That you'd called asking for help with a prescription, $20, Frank, and he turned you down and then made a joke about it at my birthday party. The same night he gave me that bracelet. She reached up and touched her wrist, where the bracelet had been in the photograph, and I noticed she wasn't wearing it now. I confronted him, she said, yesterday, and when I did, it all came apart at once, because I'd also been wondering, quietly, for a while now, how a man on his salary was affording the house renovations, the private school deposit for Chloe, that bracelet, on top of everything else. So I asked Robert to pull some records, because Robert still handles some of their financial planning as a favor. Frank, they are $40,000 in credit card debt. They took out a second mortgage on the house 6 months ago that Rebecca never told me about. Michael has been telling everyone, including us, that you have money put away, an inheritance from somewhere, that you refused to help with Chloe's school fund because you were, his word, tight-fisted. That's why we never offered to help you either. We genuinely believed you were sitting on money and simply chose not to share it with your own grandchild's education. I sat very still. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I don't have an inheritance, I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I have my pension. That's it. That's all there's ever been. I know that now, she said, and her eyes were wet. I looked at your bank statements yesterday, Frank. Michael gave Robert access years ago for some loan co-signing thing, and Robert still had it. There's $1,100 in your checking account. There's nothing else. No investments. No hidden accounts. Nothing. She pushed the envelope toward me across the table. That's what's in here. Bank statements. And something else. My hands were shaking a little when I opened it. Bank statements, mine, printed out, my humble little balance laid bare on the table between us. And beneath that, a second document, a loan statement from a jewelry financing company. The bracelet hadn't been paid for outright. Michael had financed it. $6,200. At an interest rate that made my stomach turn. On a payment plan that would take him 3 years to pay off, on top of the mortgage, on top of the credit cards. He'd gone into debt to buy his mother-in-law a bracelet, while telling everyone, including her, that his own father was hoarding money and letting his family starve for it. I've been horrible to you, Patricia said, and I watched a woman who had never once in 6 years looked me fully in the eye now unable to look away. I looked down on you, Frank. I thought you were, I don't know, beneath us, somehow, simple. I never once asked what your life had actually cost you to give that boy everything he has. And the whole time, you were the only honest one in this family. She glanced at my kitchen counter then, where my pill bottle sat next to a stack of unopened mail. Is that it? The medication. $20 a month, I said. That's all it ever was. Something in her face broke entirely at that. She reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook, and I put my hand up to stop her. I don't want your money, I said, and I meant it. I don't need charity, Patricia. I need my son to be honest. That's the only thing I ever wanted from him. She nodded slowly and put the checkbook away, and I respected her more in that moment than I had in 6 years of Thanksgivings, because she didn't push it. Then let me do this instead, she said. Come to dinner Sunday. All of us. Let Robert and I say what needs to be said in front of Michael, and let him explain himself to your face because he owes you that, at minimum, and frankly he owes Rebecca an honest conversation about the money too. She doesn't know the full extent of the debt. I only found half of it. I agreed to go, though I spent the 3 days leading up to that Sunday feeling something I hadn't felt in years, a strange, unfamiliar mixture of dread and something that might have been anticipation, the sense that after 30 years of swallowing things, I was finally going to get to say them out loud. Sunday came, gray and cool, and I drove my old truck up that long circular driveway one more time. Robert answered the door himself, which he'd never done before, always leaving that job to a housekeeper or to Patricia. He shook my hand with both of his and held it a moment too long, the way men do when words aren't quite enough. Frank, he said, I owe you an apology I should have offered years ago. I let my son-in-law's version of you become the only version I ever bothered to check. That's on me. Inside, Michael was sitting at the dining table, and when he saw me walk in behind Robert and Patricia, his whole face changed, the practiced ease draining out of it in real time. Dad? What's going on? Why are you? Sit down, Michael, Robert said, and his voice had none of the friendly golf course warmth I'd always heard him use before. "We're going to have an honest conversation as a family, starting right now." Rebecca came in from the kitchen carrying a serving dish, saw my face, saw her father's face, and set the dish down slowly, sensing immediately that something was wrong. Patricia laid the documents out on the table, the same ones she'd shown me, the debt statements, the bank records, the jewelry financing paperwork. She told Rebecca everything, calmly, without theatrics, the credit cards, the second mortgage, the $6,000 financed for her own birthday present, the lie Michael had told about my supposed inheritance. Rebecca's face went through something I've only seen a few times in my life, a kind of controlled collapse, like watching a building implode from a distance, still standing but hollow inside. "Is that true?" she asked him, and her voice was very small. "Is any of that true?" Michael's mouth opened and closed a few times before anything came out. "Rebecca, I can explain. It's not as bad as it. You told me his father had money," she said, and now her voice was rising. "You told me that's why we shouldn't feel guilty about not helping him. You made me feel like a good person for not calling him, Michael. You used him to make yourself look generous to my parents." I sat there and I watched my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone since he was 11 years old, try to talk his way out of a hole he had dug for himself one lie at a time. I thought about the note his mother used to leave him, the drawings she'd made so he wouldn't forget her voice, and I wondered what she would have thought of the man sitting across from me now. "I asked you for $20, I said, and the table went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me. $20, Michael, for a prescription that keeps me from having a stroke. And you told me you didn't have it the same week you financed a $6,000 bracelet you couldn't afford either. You didn't refuse me because you were broke. You refused me because you'd already decided I didn't matter enough to ask." He looked at me, and for just a second, I saw something honest cross his face, something that looked almost like the boy who used to leave drawings for his mother. "Dad, I didn't think of it like that. I swear I didn't." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't think of me at all." Robert stood up. Then, "Michael, I think it's best if you take some time away from the house. Rebecca needs space to figure out what she wants, and frankly, so do we. I can't in good conscience keep vouching for you at the office either, not after this." Michael left that afternoon, and the house was very quiet after the door shut behind him. Patricia made tea nobody really drank. Rebecca sat with her head in her hands for a long while, and eventually, Chloe wandered in from the playroom, 7 years old, oblivious, and climbed straight into my lap the way she always used to when she was smaller, and I held on to her longer than was probably normal, because it was the first thing all day that had felt uncomplicated and good. In the weeks that followed, things settled the way things settle after a storm, slowly, unevenly. Michael moved into a small apartment across town. He lost his position at Robert's old company, though Robert was gracious enough to give him a fair severance rather than fire him outright for cause, which honestly said more about Robert's character than anything he'd said to me in 6 years. Rebecca didn't file for divorce right away. She told me once, over coffee at my kitchen table of all places, that she needed time to figure out if the man she married was someone who'd made one desperate, cowardly mistake, or someone who'd been lying to her about who he was for their entire marriage. I didn't have an answer for her. That wasn't a question I could answer for anyone. Patricia started calling me most weeks, just to check in, which felt strange at first and then didn't. She brought Chloe by on Saturdays sometimes, and the two of them would sit at my kitchen table, and Patricia would ask me questions about Michael as a boy, real questions, like she was trying to understand a version of her son-in-law she'd never bothered to learn about before. I told her about the drawings he used to leave his mother. I told her about the night his mother died and how he'd asked me, at 11 years old, if it was his fault for not saying goodbye that morning, before school. Patricia cried at that, and I realized she'd never once considered that Michael had a whole history before he ever showed up at her dinner table in a nice collared shirt. Robert insisted on paying off my medical costs going forward, not as charity, he was careful to say, but as what he called a standing family arrangement, the same kind of thing he'd have done for Rebecca or Patricia without a second thought. It took me a long time to accept it, longer than it probably should have, but eventually I understood that refusing wasn't proving anything except my own stubbornness, and stubbornness had already cost me enough. Michael called me about 2 months after that Sunday dinner. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer. "Dad?" he said, and his voice sounded different, worn down in a way I hadn't heard before. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for real this time, not the kind of sorry I used to say to get out of a conversation. I've had a lot of time to think, working nights at a warehouse now, and I keep thinking about how you never once, not once in my whole life, made me feel like I was a burden. And I made you feel like $1 over $20. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't, and I'd spent enough of my life saying things were okay when they weren't. I appreciate you saying that," I told him instead. "That's a start. It's not an ending. You've got a long way to walk before we're back to where we used to be, if we ever get there. But it's a start. He's still walking that road, far as I know. He sees Chloe on a regular schedule now, supervised for a while at first, though that's eased up as he's shown he can be consistent. He calls me sometimes on Sundays the way he used to, and we talk about small things, the weather, how the warehouse job is going, how Chloe did on her spelling test. He hasn't asked me for anything, and I haven't offered anything beyond conversation. I think that's about where it should sit for now. I think about that phone call sometimes, the one where I asked my own son for $20 and he told me he didn't have it. I think about how small that request was, and how large the answer turned out to be, revealing everything about who he'd let himself become. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust him again in the way I did before, back when he was just a boy who thought his father could do anything. But I've learned something this year that I wish I'd learned decades sooner, which is that love doesn't mean absorbing however someone chooses to treat you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the people who deserve honesty, is to stop pretending that silence is the same thing as peace. Chloe still calls me Pop. She still climbs into my lap and falls asleep sometimes on Saturday afternoons while cartoons play in the background, and when she does, I think about her great-grandmother, Diane, and I think she would have liked the man I'm slowly becoming, the one who finally learned, at 64 years old, that his voice was worth using all along.